All right, so it's a rainy Christmas Eve here, and I'm gonna paint later hopefully, but I just thought I'd share some memories from winter break, 1978, Montclair, New Jersey. I was in 8th grade, I was 13 years old, and to give you some cultural references, the big movie of the time was Grease with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. That movie was huge. I didn't actually see the movie. It was mostly girls that were obsessed with that movie. You know, they talked about it, learned all the songs, they could sing all the songs. The songs were on the radio too. But yeah, that movie was huge. I was more interested in a movie called The Deep, which was about a couple who went to Bermuda and then somehow got involved in searching for sunken treasure, you know, with like treasure maps and all that sort of thing. But I don't think I was allowed to see it because it was rated R. Anyway. So Grease was a big movie. As far as music goes, Billy Joel, The Stranger, that album was really big. And then there was also somebody that you might not have heard of, a singer by the name of Meatloaf, who was like this enormous guy with a big voice, very dramatic kind of music. Also really appealed to primarily like 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade girls. It was super popular. Yeah, you don't hear Meatloaf much anymore. I'm sure you could see his videos. But anyhow, so that's sort of some cultural references. Leading up to the holiday, there was no, you know, my brothers and I had 2 younger brothers, one who's a year younger, another who's 5 years younger. And leading up to the holiday, we would be looking through, you know, for Christmas gifts, you know, like we'd make our list or whatever. And we would look through the Sears catalog. Not that we'd shop at Sears per se, but it was like the only place that I knew of where you could see everything, you know, all the available like toys or, you know, whatever. We were mostly interested, I think my brother and I really wanted a BB gun, like a Daisy rifle. We never got one, but so we would always look through the through this Sears catalog, which was usually about an inch thick. And we just sort of like wear that thing out for the month or so leading up to Christmas break. Anyway, so the things we did on Christmas break, obviously there were no smartphones or anything like that or internet. In fact, the phone was like pretty much anchored to the wall, typically in your kitchen, you know, and if it was like a luxury if you had a long cord so you could actually go sit down somewhere. So, you know, wasn't a lot of time spent on the phone, although it did, you know, started talking to girls and stuff like that. And those conversations would be kind of long, like a half hour, an hour at times. Although if I was on the phone with a girl for an hour, definitely my brothers would be like, you know, kind of give me a hard time about that, but, possibly. So anyway, but the main thing that we did during Christmas break, well, something happened like right as Christmas break started. I had a great uncle, so he would have been my dad's uncle technically. He would show up, and he was a bachelor. He was like in his early 60s, and he was a total character. And this guy we loved him because he was kind of like one of the few adults who he would tell stories and he wouldn't edit them for us as kids. Like he'd leave in the bad words, and his stories were really entertaining. So, so he would always show up at the beginning of winter break, and like I remember he might show up late at night, and then we'd come down the next morning for breakfast, and there'd be a $20 bill sitting next to each of our plates. And to give you an idea, in 1978, $20 was a lot of money for a kid. That's like $75 in today's money. So that was a great way to start the break. And he was really cool to hang out with. I think I said he was in his early 60s, but he used to like to walk everywhere. And and us kids, that's how we got around. I mean, we were outdoors all the time, and we'd walk everywhere. In the wintertime, we'd walk because we couldn't ride bikes really, and because of the snow and ice and all that. Or skateboard, that was the other way we got around. So anyway, we'd go out and walk with him, and I remember like we'd go up to the grocery store and he'd like say, yeah, go ahead, pick whatever cereal you want. And normally we'd be eating like the healthier cereals like Cheerios and Wheaties and Rice Krispies. But then when Uncle Francis came, he would be like, yeah, no, go get whatever you want. And we'd like get, my brother Kev would get honeycombs, and I'd get like Apple Jacks. And then my little brother James would walk up and he'd have Rice Krispies. And we're like, dude, no, you don't get the point. Get something like, get Fruity Pebbles, man. Anyway, so that was our chance to get a sugar cereal. Anyhow, so we enjoyed hanging out with Uncle Francis, who usually showed up at the beginning of the trip. But the things we do, we were outdoors like the whole time. And like I said, there was nothing that could occupy your brain the way today. I mean, I even find myself, you know, it's whether it's a computer or it's your phone or whatever, there was nothing to distract you. I mean, the only other distraction I had during winter break, like after a day outside of activity, I did used to like to come in, if we had a fire going or whatever, which we did typically, I'd come in and usually read Mad magazine. I wasn't much into books when I was in 8th grade, but I did like Mad magazine a lot. And there was some other kind of comics, kind of humor that were considered edgy sort of comics, and they really weren't. But there was like Cracked magazine, or, you know, and Mad magazine. And then there were these other ones that were kind of similar to that, which I can't remember the names of now, but I used to love reading those. So that was like the only thing that really distracted your mind, so to speak. And there's television, but remember television in 1978, there was no cable. At least we didn't have cable. I think cable was just starting. So you had television that, you know, you had maybe 9 channels, probably less than that. There were 3 networks and then a few other smaller local channels. And then you know, we had a black and white TV and got bad reception. Now, I'll say that in 78, a lot of people had color. We just were not a big TV family. So our TV was black and white, and, you know, it had the antenna on top that you try to get reception, but half of the time it'd be like all fuzzy and whatever. So basically we didn't watch a lot of television either. Video games, I don't think Atari had come out that yet at this point. I don't think so. So really weren't a lot of distractions. You pretty much had to get out in the world and do something. So here are the activities we did. Being that it was winter, we lived across the street from a school, and in the back of the school there were some pretty big hills. So we'd go, you know, go sleigh riding back there, or take a disc, you know, plastic disc, and go, and we'd spend hours doing that. The other thing that was interesting about behind the school was we had a neighbor, a friend of mine, Mike, who lived behind us, and he had older brothers and sisters, and so they had these certain like old snow toys, so to speak, that we felt like were super old. Like, man, these things are antiquated, like an old disc or an old sled. But he had something called a snurfer, which was like a yellow water ski, and it had like little nails pounded into it for grip, and it had like a rope that was tied to the nose of this thing. You can check this out. It was the first snowboard, and it was made, I think, in the early or mid 60s. And so we were digging around in his basement, and we found this snurfer. And so we used to go out, and we'd be, you know, go on the discs and sleigh ride and all that, but we became obsessed with this snurfer because we were into skateboarding and stuff. So so that was a big thing, like riding discs, and we used to make, like, we'd spend hours out there kind of making a bobsled run, like, you know, kind of moving the snow around and making, you know, kind of like building up banks out of the snow. I mean, all day we'd be out there. But the snurfer, this snowboarder, the original snowboarder or whatever, was kind of crazy because you'd hang on to this thing and you'd go bombing down the hill, and you couldn't turn it. It was just like, it just went straight. There was no control whatsoever. You just had to kind of hang on and go for the ride. And it wasn't till probably another 10 years after that I think snowboarding became, you know, probably in the late 80s. I remember in the early 80s, there were Burton snowboards. People were trying to figure that out. Anyway, it took years for that to develop. I'm surprised, I mean, but it was fun. But yeah, it's very primitive. I'll leave a link to Snurfer down below if you want to see a video of what it actually looked like. Anyway, so that was one thing we'd do, spend a lot of time doing that. And then if the pond We also lived next to a park, Edgemont Park, and there was a pond out there, and if the pond froze over, then we'd be out ice skating, provided that it wasn't covered with snow. When it would cover with snow, this always surprised me. They'd pull a little Jeep out there with a snow plow, and they'd plow that thing, and we'd always watch to see the Jeep going out on the ice, you know, and the driver would be really careful because you're thinking, okay, is this ice thick enough? Is it going to support a Jeep? And I'm sure there are times where it wasn't, but most of the time, like, they'd get out there and they'd plow that thing, no problem. And then, and there was a little shelter house where you could put on your skates and you could get hot chocolate, and they were playing the music of the day in there, and it was like total teen hangout kind of situation. Very primitive though, it was like not fancy at all. But I remember the cool thing about going in ice skating is that, you know, here we are on winter break, and I'd see the kids that were in my neighborhood, but the kids from school, like if you had a crush on somebody at school or whatever, you know, going to skate on the pond was an opportunity to possibly see some kids from school, maybe see your crush out there or whatever. And, you know, and we used to go and play a lot of pond hockey, and then also just skate around, and we loved that. And then by this time in 8th grade, it was funny, for some reason, we grew up, my brother and I, Kevin, grew up with figure skates. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I'm not passing judgment on it. But my dad, for some reason, was like into figure skates. And I'll have to ask him about that. Like, dude, what was up, like, giving your boys figure skates? I would say the default would be hockey skates. And then if the kid's like, no, I want to learn how to figure skate, then you'd say, oh, okay, well, then we'll get you some figure skates. But I remember us out there trying to play hockey with figure skates, and like all the boys, other boys would be like, what? You know, like, what the hell, you know? But so we finally, I think one Christmas, you know, we'd asked for hockey skates, and so we had hockey skates. And so anyway, but yeah, skating was another fun thing to do. We really enjoyed that. And then the other winter thing was like when we'd have breaks, like, or when we were exhausted from being outdoors or whatever, or if it was like snowing, then we would play games. And the game, surprisingly, at that year, the big game Christmas break was poker. And then we had, like, I'd found like a bunch of my dad's poker chips or whatever, and so we would play. I can't remember, I think it was like 5-card draw. I don't remember the name of the games, but we loved poker, and we'd play that for hours. And I don't think there were really any other board games that we'd play. It was mostly just card games, big into card games. And it would be other kids from around the neighborhood and stuff too. So yeah, it just got me thinking that, like, winter break was really interesting because you couldn't, like I said before, like none of the kids, there were a few that maybe watched TV, but not much. It was more like music. You know, there were times where you'd sit with headphones on and you'd listen to music if you had a record player that had, you know, a headphone jack. You could do that and like look at comic books or something like that. But mostly, if you wanted to be, you know, if you wanted to have something to do, you had to kind of go outside and just figure it out. Plus, too, Christmas break, your parents would be like, get the hell out of the house, especially 3 boys. You know, we were not allowed to be in the house. I remember there were times we'd get booted out late at night. I have fond memories of, like, my brother Kevin and I, like, so I was 8th grade, he was 7th grade, but we were about the same size. People often thought we were twins. One of my fondest memories is like, it was like there was a snowstorm, and obviously we could stay up late because we were on break. And so it was snowing, and it was always fun to like look out the window, and it was super quiet and everything, but the snow plows would come through, and they, you know, would push up these big banks of snow on the sides of the street. And so we got, this particular Christmas, we got these big down jackets, like puffy down jackets, which were like a new thing. That was like in 1978, that was a new thing. There wasn't, I remember it was like we hadn't ever seen those before. So it was kind of a trendy thing. We were pretty happy to get like down jackets. Wow, kind of a status symbol among kids who are still wearing flat, you know. Like, I don't even know what the jackets would be like before that, but they weren't as warm either. So anyway, Kevin and I put on these down jackets, and I remember we'd go out in the snow and just not necessarily beat on each other, but just like kind of throw each other down or try to wrestle in the snow because you wouldn't get hurt. And I remember, and we weren't the only ones, because I remember one night looking out the window and there were some teen guys, these twins that lived around, and they were probably like 16. They seemed like older guys. And they were just walking down the street, and somehow right under our street lamp in front of our house, they got into this epic battle. And I mean, I'm sure it was friendly, but these guys were big guys. So, and Kevin and I were sitting in the bay window just like watching this, you know, the battle of the gargantuans out there, these two, you know, big teenage guys like throwing each other around. Why they chose to do that in front of our house, I'll never know. But we found it highly entertaining. But it's fun to beat each other up in the snow, you know, because you don't get hurt, especially when wearing a big puffy down jacket. Anyhow, so those were kind of some of the things that we did during Christmas break. And, you know, I don't remember any of the gifts really very much. Oh, one other thing I remember we did, we'd always have a fire. And so I remember, like, for some reason we became obsessed with melting crayons on the fireplace shovel. Like things like that, you know, just random things, melting crayons into odd shapes. You know, and then also eating a lot of food, constantly eating, obviously, because being out in the cold and all that sort of thing. So, so anyway, those are some, that's Christmas memories, 1978. You know, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it was so much better back then. I mean, there were hard things back then too. I mean, there was things that were not as good. I mean, there were things that were challenging as well. So it wasn't like it was, you know, every time has its, you know, has its challenges. But I do think there were certain things that I do miss myself even. Like now I've become, you know, more, you know, sort of more engaged in, you know, technical devices like technology and stuff like that. And technology just was so primitive back then. And yet it was still felt like a really cool time in a lot of ways. Like, I felt like the things that we were most excited about were things like skateboarding. Well, you know, as kids, like skateboarding was going through this major development at the time, and like every year the boards would get better and the materials, you know, the wheels were like, everything was like improving, and we were obsessed with that and thought that was super exciting. But it seems like, you know, it seems like now there is more of a focus on technology, and there's a lot of great things about technology, but we did fine without it. In fact, I had good times. Anyway, going to cut it short here, but I just thought I would share some of those thoughts. I'd love to hear, you know, in the comments, if you're like my age or you're older, you know, share some of your memories from what it was like. That'd be great to read those in the comments. And also, if you're younger, you know, put something in the comments about what you like about Christmas holiday or winter break or whatever they call it these days. Anyway, well, you guys have a wonderful holiday, and I appreciate you guys, you know, following the channel and supporting what I do. So much appreciated. I will see you in the next one.